So this is our 14th episode of Ignite. For any new faces here, Ignite is our series of short webinars hosted by The Forge. And what we do is we talk about a range of issues, opportunities and challenges in the world of consumer strategy, insight and innovation, which is our world. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been having a bit of an innovation few weeks. So first of all, we spoke to the founders of a sustainable toy startup called Seahorsey. We followed that up last week with a discussion with Simon Garnett. He talked to us about why a lot of innovation fails, why there's lots of myths that have been built up around why innovation can't work and how you can unlock your organization's potential by overcoming those myths. If innovation is of interest to you, it's well worth having a look at both of those two webinars. You can find them in our LinkedIn and YouTube feeds, which I'll share in the chat shortly. So this week, continuing on our innovation and startup theme, we're going to be hearing from Eric Sampers, co-founder of no and low alcohol brand Illogical drinks. We're going to be talking about the opportunity for low and no alcohol drinks and why and how his startup came about. Eric's going to introduce himself shortly. Also on the line, question master today, we've got Simon Bailey, another one of the Forge directors. If you've got any questions during the talk, feel free to post them in the chat feed and we'll pick them either at the end or at the time, depending on the flow of the conversation. If you want to post a question to me privately, you can stick it to me. My name is Adam Rolls. Stick it in the chat there. We're also going to be recording today's session and sending it out following the session, so you can feel free to watch this without taking any notes. We'll be posting that on our social channels as well in the next couple of days. Anyway, thanks again for joining and handing over to you, Simon.
Thanks very much, Adam, and welcome, Eric. Thank you very much for joining us. As Adam said, you founded Illogical Drinks, and maybe we'd be good to start by understanding a little bit more about the background to that decision and tell us about the brand that you've already begun to develop.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eric. I'm French, which you will very easily recognize by the accent. I'm based in London. I've been living in London since 2016. I've spent most of my professional career in the corporate environment working for Pernod Ricard, which is one of the leading players in the wine and spirits industry. I've worked for them mostly in marketing in a number of countries. Moved to London in 2016 to look after their British gin portfolio, which is at a global level, which is a time where I basically learned a lot of stuff on the gin category, which is important for what I'm doing today. I left in 2019, a little bit more than a year ago, to start my own independent beverage business with some partners I met in London during my gin journey. So we've established Illogical Drinks last summer after many brainstorming sessions and late night discussions, sometimes weekend discussions, which we still have. And we've decided to play in what we believe is one of the most interesting new developments in the adult beverage industry, which is the no and low alcohol category, which is something very wide. We named our company Illogical Drinks. We're launching our first brand, which is hopefully you see behind me, called Mary. Illogical Drinks, as the name implies, sets us free to do pretty much whatever we want. Because of our background, I've got a partner who's also from the industry. I've got two people from the creative industry. We wanted to be free of pretty much everything when it comes to creating brands. And Mary is our first launch and our main focus for the next couple of months and maybe years.
Okay. Eric, why do you think that the no and low category is growing so fast? I'm interested in your perspective on that.
So for me and for my partners, because we worked with gin, it's been a fascinating laboratory of what's about to unfold from our perspective. And I'd like to put things in perspective in that sense a bit. Before I started to work with brands like Beefeater and Plymouth, I had no idea actually that gin was exploding. I was working in France with more traditional categories, and we were not hearing much about gin. And for many years, that's a category that was almost forgotten, not really trendy anymore. It had lost its battle against vodka from the end of the 90s till early 2000s, mid 2010s. It was very not in a good position, I would say. But then something happened. Gin is a category that has changed a lot, that has evolved, that has been able to attract a new generation of consumers that have seen in the natural ingredients, in the versatility, also perception of gin being healthier, something really interesting, something very sophisticated but very accessible. So we were working with a brand called Beefeater, which I'm sure you guys all know, which is a very traditional gin player, but which was not really gaining benefits from the gin renaissance, despite the powerhouse that is Pernod Ricard in terms of distribution. And so we had to try and learn what was happening, why our brand was not as attractive. And that's how we unearthed some very important consumer drivers, which helped us understand what we had to adapt. So let's forget about Beefeater and fast forward to Illogical. We basically, when we founded the company, we were wondering what was the next big thing. And we had access to lots of trend reports and articles and pieces of research already, thanks to our jobs. And we realized, well, if you look at it in this way, nolo is sort of sidestepping the gin category and borrowing lots of these drivers to build on and to create something new. So this perception of being healthier, it's a key driver. People are aspiring to a very healthy lifestyle. And that was going on way before the pandemic already. So those are very solid macro trends to build on. The sophistication, but at the same time, something a bit more informal, very accessible is super key as well, the versatility. So we basically, I think, nolo is sidestepping something that was already going on. And at the same time, it's free to go in pretty much every direction it wants. And now consumers are discovering that you don't have to drink traditional spirits and wine, and there is a massive space to invent new offering that is super interesting.
Okay. So I see that you're operating in the world of botanicals. I see Mary as a botanicals influence. So what about that sort of broader perspective on naturals? Have you a perspective on how you see that developing over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think I like to always try to dig deep and try to understand why that's happening, right? And I think beyond naturals, you've got the idea of authenticity. So again, putting things in perspective when it comes to the spirits industry, the beverage industry, the 90s and the early 2000s were the realm of marketing and a bit of artificiality. Vodka was the reigning category, attracting young people and that sort of things. And vodka has lost a bit of its aura because of the artificiality. So people are going back to authenticity, and there's nothing more authentic in the world of beverage than natural ingredients. People are extremely informed, extremely careful, looking to understand what they are consuming, what they are drinking, what they are eating. This is not a trend that is just for the beverage. This is a trend for food as well. We want to know what we are putting in our mouth. So I think it's just a consequence of that macro trend that people are fascinated by ingredients. And what's interesting about the beverage industry is that there's so many products and brands that people develop very high level of sophistication when it comes to marketing, because it's an industry where until very recently, technology had not changed for hundreds of years. So all the innovation was put in the communication, in the way you were approaching consumers and the stories you were telling. And I think people now are very fluent in terms of marketing language. They understand how it works. They understand how brands talk to them, and they're looking for authenticity. So it's a trend that's been going on for a while. People taking a bottle and trying to look information about the ingredient, about what's inside, and that sort of things, and they're paying a lot more attention. So we are going to the essence of the product, which is the naturals and the botanicals, and that's what makes them so attractive.
Eric, just as a side point, you made some good couple of good comments when we talked earlier on. Maybe tell the guys about the ABV, as I think that's quite interesting, the strength, the intrinsic elements of the product.
So you mean in our product? Yeah. So we decided to create Mary with again a completely blank canvas. And when we talk about no and low alcohol today, effectively what you will find on the market is mostly alcohol-free products. So we go from traditional spirits at standard proof, which is 40% in a spirit, for instance, suddenly to 0 or less than 0.5, which is technically what is considered low alcohol free. And in between, there's nothing, which is kind of strange, because when we were reading all these researches and studies and talking to people, yes, some people want to stop drinking alcohol altogether, but most of the people actually want to moderate their consumption. They want to I think more than 2/3 of UK adults just want to reduce their alcohol consumption, but they're not ready to completely abstain, because it's good to have a good quality drink from time to time. People just don't want to drink at every corner or every opportunity. So we thought, well, that's interesting, because many people are launching alcohol-free products after seedlip. Everybody's sort of mimicking the process, and that's something very common in the industry, where even the people who start something different start attracting followers, and people end up doing the same thing. And we said, we're going to do something different. We like alcohol. We have nothing against it. So can we, instead of making a traditional spirit or the exact opposite, which is an alcohol-free, can we use alcohol for its benefits in terms of ingredients? And we started to define our brief to work with people to help us develop the recipe. And we said, how about we use a little bit of alcohol to make things more interesting? So we don't want the inebriating effect of alcohol, but we want everything it does for flavor and aroma. There's a reason why alcohol is used in spirits. There's a reason why alcohol is used in the perfume industry. It's because it intensifies and carries flavors and aroma. And we landed on a recipe with 6% ABV, because it was sort of the perfect balance for us in terms of what it delivers in terms of taste and aroma, but also none of the negative effects of consuming alcohol. So our product is 6 to 7 times less alcohol than a gin, for instance, which means that if you pour yourself a Mary and tonic compared to a gin and tonic, you can have 6 to 7 Mary and tonic to match the effect of a gin and tonic. Okay. But when we did blind tasting, comparing Mary to alcohol-free brand, we saw that it was delivering a lot more in terms of flavor and aroma.
Okay, so just before we go on and talk about brand building, Illogical drinks and the current architecture implies possibly new drinks, new format. As far as you're able to do that, are you able to give everyone on the call a sense of how you'll progress the business?
Yeah. So again, going back to the founders, you've got 2 people from marketing, 2 people from creative industry. We're not short of ideas. And the early days of Illogical drink, we would, I think, create a new product every 2 days, and always sending exciting messages on WhatsApp and getting all excited. But at some point, that became a distraction. We settled on doing a low ABV product very early. So the Mary project, and at some point we say, okay, let's stop bringing new ideas. Let's focus on what we have to do, and we'll park some of these ideas and come back to it later. So that's exactly why we founded Illogical Drinks, to have the ability to create new brands and generate new ideas. And the name itself is very liberating, because
Yeah, sure.
Means, yeah, we can do whatever we want. No one is going to constrain us. But now we are a lot more focused on making Mary a success. And I would even say that this is the first product we launch very soon. It's very easy to see how we would do range extension. I think also what just happened or what is unfolding in front of our eyes, the pandemic is also having a serious impact on how we used to see things and how we now have to see things. And I believe that by not following a script, it allows us to be a lot more agile and flexible, because we will have to adapt to whatever this market and business is going to become for us.
Well, Eric, on that point, as a sort of seasoned brand builder, we've had to obviously go through the COVID-19 experience, and we're still very much kind of learning and moving forward from that point. What about brand building in that sort of context? What have you learned? Advice for anybody else, a practitioner in any sort of adjacent market or activity? What would you say to them?
I would say you need to be extremely connected, as always in marketing and as always when you build brands. I would say it's important to have a vision and to shape that vision and to be extremely determined when you're creating a brand. So it's always based on your core beliefs and your core principles as a marketeer. Depending on your career, you would have learned lots of things, and you will put that to work. But we also know that you need to be extremely open-minded. And when you talk about brand building, for me, what we are currently focusing on is the route to market, because in spirits and in the beverage industry, you use the route to market to build your brand, right? The way you build a brand in the on-trade, in the bars, the way you build a brand in store, the way you build a brand online, all of that has been completely messed up by the pandemic. After hopefully the worst of the health crisis is now behind us, we now have to understand for this particular industry, the beverage industry, what's going to happen to the hospitality industry, and the sequels could be dramatic for the hospitality industry. So 5 months ago, the way you would build a beverage brand would be completely different from what you're going to have to do today, and you have to adapt very, very quickly. When I say being connected, it's important and something that's been super helpful for me. By leaving the corporate environment, a big organization where you have lots of processes and it can be a bit rigid, and moving into this more entrepreneurial world, I have connected with a lot of fellow founders and people who have created products and brands, and have discovered obviously a much more agile, a much more collaborative, a much more open world, almost open source. People share contacts, people share ideas, people share lots of very good insights and advice. I'm very surprised and positively surprised by that. It's fantastic. And it's been helpful to sort of understand. And what we've seen, I'm sure everybody here follows the news. I don't know if everybody is obsessed about the beverage industry as probably I am, but you've seen the developments of people like Lucky Saint, who announces that they quickly had to switch basically their distribution channel into online sales, and then at the best months of their history during the pandemic. It's a bit strange, but it's the reality. Other people like Big Drop Brewing and all these brands that have had to adapt very quickly their route to market, because the route to market in the beverage industry is the way you build brands, right? So online is becoming super important, and I'm learning every day. I didn't know what e-fulfillment was probably 2 months ago, and now I have an e-fulfillment partner for our website. So you learn and you discover things. I think that's inherent to being an entrepreneur, because you have to do a bit of everything. And in these times particularly, you need to be very fast and agile.
Eric, just moving away from Illogical in a brand sense for a second, just talking about your journey. There might be people the call today who are pondering becoming an entrepreneur or wondering about how they might drive more agility through their own team or their own business? I mean, you started to hint at it. What are the big lessons that you've learned through that process?
Well, that's a very interesting one because I've spent 16 years in the corporate environment, and at some point I thought I'm never going to be an entrepreneur, and then a bit unhappy at work with a couple of ideas that I've been sinking in across the years, interesting chats with interesting people, and then suddenly you make the leap, right? And the very first thing, and I think the first obstacle to doing that for me was fear. It's as simple as that. Being afraid of leaving a very comfortable, it's almost an illusion, but a very comfortable corporate environment where you can get help from anywhere, where sometimes you can be a bit in the back and you're part of a bigger team and things like that. And when you actually sit down and think, I'm going to do something on my own or with some partners, you start listing what you know and what you don't know. And you start assessing if what you don't know is going to be a problem for your development. And I think that can happen for me. In my case, it happens late in my professional career. Not too late, but I will never be 30 or below 30s that will shape the future because I'm well above 30. But that process of basically sorting out the difficulties and the potential obstacles and basically going through that fear barrier was essential. And then it's about energy, it's about willingness, it's about the openness that you're able to demonstrate. So my advice for people who have been thinking about doing something is do it before it's too late. Do it before you become too afraid to take the leap, because you can do whatever you want. People will put a tag on you, and you might not have as many options as you think when it comes to reinventing yourself. So for me, it's I remember the other day I saw a sort of a silly 4-question survey or four possible answers survey. What's the most important thing that you need as an entrepreneur? And I answered something that was important to me that was not the favorite option, but it was optimism. Because if you've got enough professional luggage, if you've been through a career, you've become a resilient professional. So optimism is what is going to carry you forward. You have an idea, you have a vision, if you have the energy and some of the skills, you don't need to have them all to pursue that idea. You will be able to do it if you're very optimistic. And now in the aftermath of the pandemic, optimism is even more important because the world is changing super fast and we have to adjust and readapt quickly.
Eric, that was a fantastic distillation of quite a lot of stuff you've learned. Very instructive for people. What about this though? We often think about, leave a big organization because you can be more agile and follow your dreams. But were there things that you missed about a big corporate environment? So for people who are working in a corporate at the moment, what are some of the positives that people may not actually realize exist? And only when you haven't got it, you're like, oh, that would have been brilliant to have access to that.
Well, you definitely have access to lots of things and lots of information. So you've got, maybe sometimes you travel, you do lots of meetings. Those are to be, you have to take advantage of all of these as much as possible. There is a lot of wealth in these interactions that you can have in the large corporate environment. And you shouldn't underestimate that, because then when you're on your own, you have to knock on doors, open doors. Again, people are very collaborative, but I've learned so much in my years at Pernod Ricard that I'm basically using everything I learned now and learning new stuff, right? But there is a lot of benefit there. So if you're able to maintain this open-mindedness while you're in the corporate environment, you can start learning and accumulating a lot of luggage that will be helpful for the next step if it's the entrepreneurial step.
Okay, and would you, in terms of agility, would you have run meetings differently? Would you have approached challenges in a different way? Just interested in that.
Yeah, that's the very difficult part, because that's what's really different, right? The corporate environment. So we're talking about big structure. Big structure need to be extremely organized. You need to develop processes. If not, it doesn't work, right? If it's a coordinated effort with sometimes dozens of thousands of people. So when you unfold a strategy for a brand or a new campaign or these sort of things, you need to have processes in place. So you need to be able to understand and sometimes to create processes to make your job easy. In big corporate organization, lots of people just create processes. They organize meetings, they organize methodologies and these things. If everyone speaks a different language in a huge corporate organization, it's a mess and it's going to fail. In a small startup structure, you don't need as much processes because you're relying on very few individuals. So communication is easy. When you leave the corporate environment, my agenda was incredibly free of what I would sometimes consider useless and boring meetings, but those meetings are necessary to share information. Another major difference is the politics of the organization, right? When you're in the big corporate environment, you need to understand how internal politics work as well, because every company will have its written and unwritten rules, its ways of doing business. In your startup structure, you can pretty much reinvent those as well. So these are massive differences. And it's by understanding those gaps and again, really be willing to learn and to adjust that you make the best of both worlds. So I'm lucky today that when I speak with a supplier, a customer or partner or exchange information, I'm being seen as super professional because I carry that corporate environment baggage. So I'm never going to say, oh, it was hell and it was terrible and I'm happier today. It's different, and I'm carrying the best of the corporate environment into my new venture, and it's really helping me.
Right, Eric. Look, we'll go to any questions. So if anybody does have any questions, or Adam has had a couple of questions sent to him, Adam, you want to run through those?
Yeah, I have got a question here. It's a question from Rosa. Rosa, are you still on the line?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, Eric. Thanks. That was really interesting. I work at Asahi, and I'm fascinated to know. So in beer in the UK, we're seeing growth of non-alc is starting to show signs of plateauing. Like growth is coming more from spend per buyer rather than penetration. So I was interested from your perspective, what do you think is going to drive trial with new users or people who maybe feel a bit unsure about the non-alc space generally?
The essential thing for the no and low category as a whole, and that's a preoccupation you hear from everyone who's trying to launch new products, is quality. No and low cannot be a lesser version of what exists in the traditional categories. It has to offer something a bit different, and it has to offer a very high quality. I also think that it's far from having reached its potential because the offer is still effectively extremely limited. So there is an element of those products need to find their audience because there is demand for this sort of product. There is an audience and the distribution is super low. If you go out to your local pub or your local store, the number of options you have in no and low is extremely limited, while we know the people who want some of these options is much bigger, which is where online is going to play a huge role. I actually know some of the brewers that are at the forefront of the nolo beverage thing. So Lucky Saint, Big Drop, small beer. And I think they still have a lot of work to do when it comes to online and digital. That requires investment, and they are sort of competing with behemoth of the beer industry. So the more they will be able to invest and show their brands to consumers, whatever the channel is, the more they will generate trial. And if consumers are happy with the quality, you will see a surge in consumption. I'm lucky to have a perspective that goes beyond the UK as well. There are a number of countries where it's growing super fast and where people are eager to discover. So there is, I think, I don't know which figure you have in terms of the no and low. I think there is a lot of work to be done, and it's still very early days. But for me, quality is going. If you have good quality products, you will have happy consumers, and the market is going to develop.
Right, Eric, we're just coming up to the half an hour point, maybe a minute over. So it's been brilliant. There might be time for one more question before we wrap up. So does anybody else have a question for Eric? Okay, if they don't, Eric, there is a question I have to conclude, which is, when can I buy some Mary?
I'm waiting for my local council to send me my paperwork that will allow us to open the website very soon. So I hope by mid-July we will be starting sales on our own platform on Shopify. So it's drink the small Mary.com. So by this month in July, definitely, for sure.
That's brilliant. Eric, look, we're just over the half an hour. Thank you ever so much. I found that really interesting, both from a kind of category perspective and also some of the learnings, which I hope will also be really interesting, I'm sure, for many people on the call. So thank you again. There's going to be a brief pause in the Ignite sessions now. We expect to resume after a summer break. So Adam, you might want to just add to that.
Yeah, all that's to say is just keep an eye out on the social channels for invites going out in the next couple of weeks. We'll be away next week, but we'll be picking up after that.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Eric. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to tasting some of the product very soon. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.